Today I want to talk about inheritance, and I actually did this video once before and it was so complicated that I played it back and I couldn't understand it. So what I want to do is now just do it step by step and try and show you basically three things. First, what a base class and what a derived class are, which are the essence of inheritance. And then what the access modifiers private, protected, and public are, and how they relate to inheritance, which there's a very direct relation. And then thirdly, how methods can be replaced in derived classes, either by one of two methods, either the new method or the override method. So in order to demonstrate this, I need to add two classes, and before I can add two classes, of course, I need to add one class. And the technique I showed you previously for doing this was to click on project and then either click on add class or click on add new item and select class. Another technique you can use for doing this is to go over to the Solution Explorer and right click on that and then go to add and add new item or add class. If you add new item, of course, you have to select class, or you can just directly select class. So let's try it that way. Class is already selected, and I guess we could call this inheritance 01, say, or 02 might be better. Say add, and this gives us a separate file with the namespace inheritance 02 and the class inheritance 02. Let's change the name of the inheritance 02 class to base CLS for base class. And select rename it. And then the way we create a second class is simply copy this first class and rename it to derived class. So right now we have two entirely independent classes, and the way we make this, way we make them connected is just place a colon after the derived class, and then after the colon put the name of the base class. And the way this connects the two is that the base class is like the parent of the derived class. The derived class will inherit everything that's non-private, which I'll explain more in a second when I talk about access modifiers. So the next thing we want to do is add some members and methods to the base class. Alright, here I've added three data members and three methods, and each of these are at different levels of, you might say, security. They're basically access modifiers: public, protected, and private. So we have public, base public name, protected, base protected name, and private, base private name for the data members. And then for the methods we have public, base method public, protected, base method protected, and private, base method private. Now if we go to our main program and instantiate a class on the derived class, remember this is the derived class, not the base class, so it's the class that has absolutely nothing in it. And then I type the object name DC and a dot, you'll see in fact I can get two objects without doing anything. I can get the base public name and the base method public. So the two things that were specified as public in the base class I can get from the derived class, which just basically shows the relationship between the derived class and the base class. Essentially, in a base class you've written a bunch of code that you don't want to write over again. So you create a derived class and derive it from the base class, and anything that's non-private can be inherited by the derived class. But of course the main rationale for doing this is you don't want to just use the public members and methods in the base class. You also want to add to this base class. So you're essentially saying, I want to take this old code but I want to add some new code to it. So if you go into the derived class and you add a member of your own in the derived class, which is also public, which we're calling derived public name, and you add a member in the derived class which is also public, and we're calling it derived method public, and we go back to the main form, and now if we type the dot, we see we can now get the base public name, which is a method, the base method public, which is a method, both of these in the base class, but we can also get the derived public name and the derived method public, which are ones we added to the derived class. So we now have a class that's twice as big, even though we've only added two things in the derived class. Well, right now you might be asking yourself, I can sort of see what the private and the public access method specifiers mean. They basically mean you can only access private things from within the class they're defined in terms of private, and then you can access things that are defined public from outside the class as long as you've instantiated the class. But what's protected mean? And basically what protected mean is it comes directly from the concept of inheritance. Protected says you can access a protected member or data item from a class that's derived from that class, but you can't access it from an outside program. So down here in derived method public, I put a call to base method protected, so that we're going from a public class in derived to a protected class in the base, and you wouldn't be able to call a protected class in the base from the outside program. So if we specify we're going to call the derived class, which now has a call to the protected class, or the protected method in the base class, and then we save everything and compile and run it. If we press the do nothing button, you see the base method protected has been called, is called. Even though it's a protected method and you couldn't call it directly from the derived class, and even if you instantiated the base class you couldn't call it directly, because the derived class can access protected classes, you still can call it indirectly. The last thing I want to talk about is the idea of overriding methods that are in the base class, in the derived class. And here we see I have the derived method public and I'm calling the base method public instead of the base method protected, and this also would work. But what if instead of calling the base method public we want to have something that has the same name but has an entirely different function? And where you might want to do that, for instance, is if you're deriving a class from a DLL where you can't change the class in any way, but you want to use the same function names but do different things. The way we do this is we create a class with exactly the same name as the base class name. In this case base method public, but we'd add a keyword to it of new. So if we look at the base class that this is replacing, you see it prints out a message box, base method public has been called, and it basically is just a public void with no special keywords or anything. So if we go back to our button and we call base method public, and then we compile and run this, it's more centered. You see we get the message, base method public overridden and derived class has been called. So we never even see the base class. We've totally overridden it. If we comment all this code out with Control E, C, and then save and compile, and now we press the do nothing button, we get base method public has been called. So we're now accessing the base method class since it's no longer being overridden. Finally, a last way you can do this kind of base method replacement is with the keyword override. And the difference between override and new is new override something that's confined or defined fairly conventionally, like public void, method name. Whereas override has a method that's defined with the keyword virtual. If we look at the now modified function, we see the virtual keyword. And basically I think the main difference between having the virtual keyword and not having it is that if you say virtual, you're saying this function is being written to be overridden. We're expecting the derived class to override it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and you learned a lot. And don't forget to subscribe.